Hi ladies and gents, listen to those beautiful church bells. It's Sinead with Free Tours by Foot London. I am back and we're on another amazing walk in London today. Today I'm going to take you through 2,000 years of history and we're going to speak about two of the most iconic bridges in London, London Bridge and Tower Bridge. Now Tower Bridge is the one you're most familiar with, ladies and gents. It is the one, of course, with the Gothic towers by the amazing John Wolfe Barry and Horace Jones, and it's the Bascule Bridge that lifts about 400 times a year now, and that's the one where the rings of the Olympic Games were suspended from. Now London Bridge today, only half a mile up from Tower Bridge, although it looks quite bland and just a plain stone bridge, that's the one I want you to get excited about. We are going to talk about the 5 bridges that were on that site, the medieval bridge, the Roman bridge, and we're going to start a way back to 2,000 years ago with the first bridge crossing on the River Thames. And the River Thames, of course, is the very reason London even exists today. But for right now, we're going to head straight inside this beautiful church, the Church of the All Hallows by the Tower, reputedly the oldest church in the city. Now this tour, I will warrant its own tour, the crypt in here and the church itself, but today I just wanted to show you a plan of Roman London. So in order to start our tour today, I've brought you into the crypt of All Hallows by the Tower, and this is reputed to be the oldest church in the city of London. William Penn, the founder of Pennsylvania, was baptized in here. John Quincy Adams, the 6th president of the United States of America, married his English bride in here. And Samuel Pepys, the famous British diarist, and the reason we know so much about the Great Fire of London to this day, witnessed the Great Fire from the very steeple of this church. But not to get sidetracked, because what I want to talk to you about is this is a plan or a model of Roman London inside here in the church. And as we're going to be talking about two of the most iconic bridges in London today, have a look at number 6 there. And that is a replica or a model of the first bridge crossing on the River Thames. Now, of course, it was a wooden bridge, and we have a lot of history. So when we're walking over Tower Bridge today, I will be speaking about that wooden bridge and the 4 subsequent bridges which were built in its place to the London Bridge that we see today. But look at this incredible model of Roman London. Isn't it sensational? Now obviously you'll see there's clear markers here telling us a little bit of the history of each of the markers, so that's worth coming along. Now this area itself, this crypt itself, warrants its own tour, and I do very much plan on taking you on an entire tour of this crypt. But just a little bit, this gives you the history then of 1 through down to 13. And the bridge itself, they say, in this model is actually a splinter of wood from the remains of the piles of the original Roman bridge. This was probably built around 55 AD, replacing temporary pontoon type structures with applied wooden bridge. With the end of Roman rule in Britain in the early 5th century, Londinium was gradually abandoned and the bridge fell into disrepair. Various wooden bridges replaced it over the next 700 years until the first stone bridge was built in the 12th century. So we're going to go further on then, and I want to talk to you a little bit more about some Roman remains in the area. From here, we will head down to the Church of St. Magnus the Martyr, which once stood at the foot of the medieval London Bridge, and today holds a beautiful model of that same bridge. But before we get there, I'm going to take you to one of the best viewing points of both London Bridge and Tower Bridge. It's a 7-minute walk, so let's skip ahead. So this is probably one of the best viewing spots of both bridges. And of course, off in the distance is Tower Bridge. But of course, we'll be speaking a lot more in detail about that very shortly. You've walked several times along here with me past the Shard and over to this area. And even though it looks quite bland and plain, just a stone bridge with a couple of arches underneath, that bridge is London Bridge, and two very distinct differences between both. This one has 2,000 years of history, and Tower Bridge opened up in 1894, officially opened up in 1894, the last of the new Victorian bridges in London, and the only bascule bridge in London. And bascule takes its name from the French word seesaw, meaning the bascules are between the two Gothic towers. So that are two of the most iconic bridges in London. And by the end of this tour, you will know exactly the difference between them. But I want to make this one a little bit more exciting because there's so much to tell you about the incredible London Bridge. So I did sidetrack there a little bit just to show you those amazing views between both bridges. And those viewing platforms are all along the riverbank between both sides of the bridge, the north and south bank of the bridges. So I want to take you down though. We're back on Lower Thames Street and we're going to make our way down here towards the church of St. Magnus the Martyr. So we've made it here to St. Magnus the Martyr Church. And just inside the church, there's some very cool, well, remnants of the Roman period. And also, the bridge in front of you see right now, of course, is London Bridge. But that was not the original location. The first London Bridge and the bridge up until 1831 was actually, your entrance to the bridge would have been through this archway, and you would have crossed over the River Thames from this direction. So here you'll see this churchyard formed part of the roadway approach to Old London Bridge between 1176 and 1831. Now, when John Rennie and Sons built the fourth London Bridge on the site in 1831, they built it a bit further north. So this would have been the original location of the London Bridge from 1176 to 1831. Now, I wanted to show you some very cool features here, and look at this, ladies and gentlemen. This dates back to the Roman wharf that was here in AD 75. So this is actually some of the original timber from the Roman wharf in AD 75, and it was found on Fish Street Hill in 1931. So refer back to the Roman London exhibit I just showed you there in the bottom of the church, in the crypt of the Church of the All Hallows by the Tower. This was some of its foundation. Now, something that is rather fascinating along here as well are these stones are original to the bridge built in the 1700s. Now, how incredible is that? And they are still standing to this day. Look how, through erosion and everything, that they are still, through that many centuries, here in the courtyard of St. Magnus the Martyr. So the River Thames is directly in front of us here, would be directly ahead of us here. So this is where the traffic, massive traffic, would have come through to cross over the river. Now, I did want to show you, there is a plan, again, a model inside of the Old London Bridge, and I hope the church is open. I'm not quite sure if it is, but we'll see if we can get inside. So we've just walked in to St. Magnus the Martyr Church, and I met two lovely clerks of the church, giving me some fabulous permissions here to, this is what I wanted you to see, to film the replica, or the model, which they've just restored and renovated, of the medieval London Bridge. And it just gives you a sense from the Southwark side of how chaotic the bridge would have been in medieval times. And they have 900 miniature little models on the bridge there. And this would have been the 15th century bridge. And as you'll notice underneath, it had 19 arches. And when the River Thames froze, as you can see here, it would recreate these rapids, because the Thames would funnel through the bridge and it would be frozen on one other side. So the difference in water levels between both sides of the bridge could be as much as 6 feet. And these incredible rapids would head through. So you really took your life in your hands if you crossed under the bridge, and what they call shooting the rapids or shooting the bridge. Thousands of boats capsized and several lives were lost over the years. But these are the example of all the different houses, timber houses that would have been on the bridge. And I want to bring you around because we can actually get a look at the model of the bridge. I mean, this is stunning craftsmanship. And the gentleman who did this, the chap was just telling me there, he's only recently passed away. Well, not recently, but yeah, he did pass away, but I don't think he got to see his amazing work. And this model is so impressive of the former medieval London Bridge. And if you look closely there, you'll see the chaos and the frantic congestion on the bridge. But imagine living in one of those houses. Now, this was the chapel that was dedicated to Thomas Becket, and it's where the pilgrims would start out on their pilgrimage to the shrine of Thomas Becket. And that chapel was a massive distinguishing feature on the bridge. So the Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales were inspired by those pilgrims who would start out here. And I'm just going to get an overhead view for you as well of the model. But I mean, isn't it incredible to think that this was the original London Bridge? Well, after the wooden bridge built by the Romans that we saw already. Now, it's also important to note as you leave the church that we are on the site of the former London Bridge. However, the church itself was one of the first casualties of the Great Fire of London 1666 because of its proximity to Pudding Lane. And this church you see today was rebuilt by Sir Christopher Wren. And one of the more amazing features of the church is this stunning clock, which would have been the clock and would have been quite visible to the people, of course, crossing London Bridge. This clock was erected in 1709, and the stunning features on it, again, would have made it quite visible to the people on London Bridge. However, now you have an office block, Adelaide House, which completely obscures the view, even though the bridge itself was moved a little further north in its fourth part of its construction. So we're going to actually start and put it all together for you, because we've seen a model of Roman London and the wooden bridge. We've also seen this incredible model of the medieval bridge here in St. Magnus the Martyr Church. But let's go all the way back and talk a little bit more about medieval London. And you will know from my previous videos, the video on Crossbones Cemetery and the Bishop of Winchester and the South Bank, that I do have a slight obsession with the gruesome history of medieval London. So the next bridge after the Roman bridge that was built on the site was commissioned, actually. Construction began and it was commissioned by King John. Well, Henry II initially, sorry. The reason I'm hesitating there is Henry II was the first that commissioned the bridge in 1176, but it took 33 years to complete. And the bridge was later finished in 1209, and that was in the reign of King John. The bridge was a stone bridge. Excuse me, I'm muddling my words today. I'm not with the situation. Do you know, I think it's that I'm a bit weirded out actually, because I am off today and it's a Saturday. So we're going to see a lot of tourists around today. But let's go back to the bridge. So for over 600 years, this was the only crossing right here beside me on the River Thames. And it ferried pedestrians, passengers, goods and livestock. And it was recorded that in 1358 in medieval times, there was some 138 shops on the bridge, and along with houses that were built also on London Bridge. Some of those houses were recorded as being 7 foot high. And I just want you to see over here, if you look straight across literally directly under where the shard is, and that piece of glass there is, that is remnants of the former site of the original London Bridge up until the 1830s. So it would have been directly in front of you here that I'm pointing towards straight away. But that bridge, as we saw in the model, was crammed with houses, was crammed with shops, and a chaotic crossing on the River Thames. And that chaotic crossing sometimes became so congested it could take up to an hour to even cross the bridge. So people would take what we call little ferries from this side to this side of the river and cross over and back if they could afford to do so. However, structurally, the bridge was designed very, very badly. Now, we saw on the original bridge, and we'll flash up an image of it, there was 19 arches. Some say 20, it depends on what books you read, but there was between 19 and 20 arches under the bridge, and they were irregularly shaped arches. And that combined with the river funneling through these 19 arches, again, it was kind of to prevent foreign ships from passing through under the bridge without permission, essentially. But that combined with high winter and upriver tended to freeze over. It actually affected the tidal ebb and flow. And what ensued were these ferocious rapids between the arches on the bridge. So people actually took their lives in their hands by taking these ferries from one side of the river to the other. And thousands of people died and drowned, and casualties of these ferocious rapids, or shooting the bridge as they used to call it, or shooting the rapids, or shooting the bridge. So a little bit more sensible years later, people had the ingenious idea then of tying their boats to ropes, crossing over the bridge, literally dragging them along with them. A much safer approach to crossing the bridge at the time. Now, these extremely dangerous rapids and them affecting the tidal flow of the ebb and flow of the tidal river, sometimes the actual difference in height between water levels was about 6 feet. So you can imagine how treacherously dangerous it was. But it prompted the expression as well, of course, London Bridge, for wise men to go over and fools to go under. But getting back to the chaotic part of London Bridge, so a lot of these houses, some of them were about 7 foot high, and they hung over the bridge, but they also hung over the road on the bridge. Now that road was estimated to be only 12 foot wide, and the road would become extremely congested. There was a very tragic fire on the bridge. It was a fire hazard, of course, as well, with so many shops and massive buildings on the bridge at the time. And that fire in 1212 started on the northern part of the bridge and the southern gatehouse part of the bridge, trapping people in the middle, and over 3,000 people died from both drowning and, well, from the fire itself on board the bridge. So structurally unsound, essentially, but a massive part of London's history. Now, it was flanked from the north side by a gatehouse, and the southern side also had a gatehouse. And in 1170, a chapel, and we're going to head up the stairs here, was also built on the bridge, and it was dedicated to St. Thomas Becket. And this is where pilgrims would start out on their pilgrimage to his shrine at Canterbury Cathedral. St. Thomas Becket, of course, he was executed in 1710 by knights of King Henry II. And it's a fascinating, very long tale, but after his death, the monks had buried him in the crypt in Canterbury Cathedral. And people had wanted to visit his grave because there was reports that relics that were soaked in blood after his execution had healing properties and miraculous powers. So he was canonized because of miracles that occurred after people visited his tomb in Canterbury Cathedral. And he was canonized on the 21st of February in 1173. Now here we are on top of London Bridge, and today is full of tourists and pedestrians. But because that narrow bridge was so narrow, also a fascinating part of our history today allegedly came about as a result of the City of London Corporation insisting to relieve congestion on the bridge that all traffic heading from Southwark, which is straight ahead of us, into the City of London, which is right behind us, was to keep to the west side of the bridge, and all traffic coming from the city behind me here to Southwark was to be kept to the east side of the bridge. And allegedly that is how we ended up driving on the left-hand side of the road. But the chapel, we estimate, would have been right here in the centre, and this is the chapel dedicated to Thomas Becket. It's where the pilgrims would first set out on their pilgrimage to the same shrine at Canterbury Cathedral. And of course it was inspired in the tales, and that journey is spoken about so eloquently in Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales. Now, still in medieval times, it also had a very depressing sight on the southern part of the bridge that we're heading towards now. The gatehouse on that side of the bridge is where they displayed on top of it, on spikes, the severed heads of traitors. Now, the keeper of the gatehouse, very grim job, and what type of person actually holds a position like this, but his job was to boil or parboil the severed heads of traitors, place them on the spikes as a warning to anybody entering London that treason would not be accepted in any shape or form by the crown. And the majority of these people's heads that were severed had been hung, drawn and quartered. But the keeper of the gate, he would parboil the heads in boiling water, and this was to preserve the heads that were put on the spikes so the crows wouldn't peck at them. And some of the more famous people that had their heads displayed on top of these spikes was William Wallace. Now, having said that, his was displayed on the northern gatehouse, which would have been at this end of London Bridge. The likes of Thomas More, his head was executed, and his head was on display here. Guy Fawkes, another one, and I believe Wat Tyler. I need to do a bit of research on that just to make sure, but I'm pretty sure. I know he was hung, drawn and quartered, so his head would have been placed on these spikes as well. So the medieval bridge in London is a fascinating history. So it was all the way up until the 1700s that houses still remained on this bridge. But in 1756, the London Bridge Act gave the London Corporation the power to buy all houses on the bridge in order to demolish the bridge that stood there at that time to improve it for traffic. So by 1762, all houses were demolished, and after nearly 550 years of residence, the bridge was to be eventually resident free. So we're in the vicinity of London Bridge Station, and that's situated under the Shard, and just ahead of you there you'll see the tips of Southwark Cathedral, one of the most important cathedrals in Southwark here, and that is where William Shakespeare's brother is buried. So it's most likely the church of worship of the Shakespeare family. Now, as we're heading in, you'll see the familiar dragons that I've spoken about in my City of London tour. And here's one. And that's telling us we're leaving the City of London and entering into the borough of Southwark. And here is a replica of the type of spikes that they use to, well, to display severed heads of traitors on the Southern Gate entrance of London Bridge. So after the medieval bridge, we had the bridge in the 1700s, and when the last housing was removed, they did an improvement on that bridge, but by 1831, another bridge was built on the site by John Rennie and his son. And that bridge stood here till, I believe it was in the 1960s. They knew they needed to rebuild another bridge again to widen the bridge and give it more room for pedestrians again. London had become a huge swelling population in the city, and they wanted to replace the bridge, but it was becoming exceptionally expensive to do so. So they had the ingenious idea of offering it up for auction. Never in a million years, I guess, believing they would get so much money for the bridge, and it was eventually bought by Robert McCulloch, an American millionaire who bought the John Rennie Bridge. And there is a misconception over the years that he thought he was buying Tower Bridge, but that's not the case. That's completely untrue, but it's still, listen, in guide mythology, it still reigns supreme. But he eventually bought the bridge, and he dismantled it, had it dismantled piece by piece, shipped to the United States of America, and there's now a huge tourist attraction there because it was erected in Lake Havasu in Arizona. So that is the stunning history today of London Bridge. Next, we're going to head towards, I guess, one of the more iconic visuals in London, and that is Tower Bridge. But that's going to have to wait until part 2, when we will be walking across Tower Bridge to take in some stunning views before I head up to the Tower Experience, which includes a glass-bottomed walkway 42 metres above the river. That is, if I can get my nerves up. Keep an eye out for that video. We should be publishing it shortly, and we'll include a link to it in the description of this video, or it might just pop up on the screen here. I'd also like to thank you all sincerely for all your donations, your thanks, your tips, and your wonderful comments. You are the reason that I am able to do this, so thank you most sincerely. And remember, you can book me for a private tour. My contact information is in the description below. See you soon.